The calm you admire in others is not a gift they received at birth. It's the result of years of practice you've never done. Think about that for a moment. When you see someone who maintains composure in a situation that would have driven you out of your mind, when you observe a person who responds with equanimity where you would have exploded, when you wonder how they can be so calm before something that should clearly disturb them, what you're not seeing is the work behind it. Not inherited calm, the training that produced it, the morning preparation that man does before his day begins, the deliberate practice of holding center in the small, everyday irritations he accumulates week after week, the honest review of his days that gives him visibility over his patterns and allows him to adjust the work for the next day. That training, invisible from outside, is exactly what produces what from outside looks like a gift. It isn't. It's work. And the good news is that work is available to you. The bad news is there are no shortcuts. Welcome to episode 10 of Master Your Mind. This is Stoicism for Winners. In the previous episode, we reached the root of all the suffering the previous episodes had worked on. Judgment. It's not things that disturb you, but what you think about them. The three-part mechanism, the neutral event, the judgment the mind adds, the emotion that responds to the judgment. The understanding that unnecessary suffering doesn't come from circumstances, but from judgments about circumstances. And the possibility, demonstrated by Epictetus from the most extreme conditions possible, of examining and directing those judgments. Today, we build on that understanding, but in a completely different way. Today, we're not going to talk about theory. Today, we're going to talk about practice, about training, about the concrete, everyday, measurable work the Stoics did to convert philosophical understanding into the way of being their writings document. Because there's an enormous gap between understanding that judgment produces suffering and having the real capacity to examine and direct that judgment in the moment where it matters most. That gap is called training. And the Stoics didn't just recognize it, they worked on it every day with specific practices. Concrete ones, doable in the margins of a busy life, not week-long retreats, not hour-long meditation sessions, not dramatic one-time transformations, the 5-minute morning preparation before the day starts pushing, the deliberate practice with small irritations during the day, which are the gym where real calm is built, and the 10-minute evening examination that closes the cycle and prepares the next day. 3 practices. 15 minutes of conscious work per day, plus attention during the day. That's the Stoic training program, not the one Marcus Aurelius had at a retreat, the one he practiced on military campaign, governing the most powerful world of his era, with wars and plagues and betrayals around him, in the conditions he had, with the time he had. That same thing is available to you, with your conditions, with your time. Today, there's something this episode needs to say from the beginning before the lessons arrive. Training calm is not what most people imagine when they hear that phrase. It's not sitting in silence thinking about nothing. It's not a spiritual practice separate from life. It's not something you do under special conditions and then apply to ordinary life. It's exactly the opposite. Stoic, calm training happens in life. In the difficult conversations, in the traffic, in the news that produces frustration, with the colleague who says what he always says, that activates you. In the situation that gets complicated, without you having planned it. That's the gym, not a room with mats. Ordinary life with all its everyday irritations, and the person who understands that, who sees each irritation as a practice repetition instead of as a threat to their peace, has an enormous advantage over whoever waits for life to become easier in order to be calm. Life doesn't become easier, you become more skilled, and the skill is built in the gym of ordinary life. With each irritation, you handle a little better than the previous one. That's Stoic training. The three philosophers accompanying you today each contributed a fundamental piece of the program. Marcus Aurelius contributed the morning, preparation, the practice of anticipating the day's difficulties before they arrive, from the calm of the morning when the mind hasn't yet been bombarded by the world's demands. Seneca contributed the evening examination, the honest review of the day that allows seeing clearly where he held center and where he lost it, without self-punishment, just information, the material with which the next day's work can be made more precise. And Epictetus contributed practice with the small things, the understanding that great tests are faced with the capacity built in the small ones, and that whoever doesn't practice with the insignificant will never have calm available when what really matters arrives. 3 contributions, 3 pieces of a complete program that this episode delivers in its most concrete and most applicable form. The phrase that accompanies you today is this: I train calm every day in what I have. Let's begin. But before we begin, I want you to do something. Think about the last time someone you admire maintained calm in a situation where you hadn't been able to. You don't have to know them personally. It can be someone from your environment. It can be someone you observed from afar. What matters is that you saw it. You saw the calm you didn't have, and perhaps in that moment you thought it was something that person had, and you didn't. That it was their way of being, their nature, something inherited or innate that simply hadn't fallen to you. If that resonates with you, if there's something you recognize in what you just heard, stop this podcast right now. Go to the pod, comments, and write this: I train calm every day in what I have. Write it. Don't think it. Write it. Because writing it is the first declaration that what you see in others is not a gift that doesn't belong to you. It's a practice you haven't started yet, and that starts today. I train calm every day in what I have. Go. Write it. And when you come back, we continue. First Stoic lesson. Calm is not a gift some are born with and others aren't. It's a skill that's trained just like a muscle, and you've never trained it seriously. There's a belief most people have about calm that ensures they never train it. The belief that it's a personality trait, that there are people who are born calm and people who are born reactive, that some have the character to maintain composure and others simply don't. That if you're someone who explodes easily, if you get activated by provocations, if anxiety pulls you from the present regularly, that's who you are. A fixed trait, not something you can fundamentally change. That belief is exactly what ensures the training never starts. Why train something that's fixed? Why work on developing something you either have or don't have? And while that belief operates, calm continues to be something observed in others and lamented in yourself. Something you don't have, and they do. The Stoics, who observed the human mind with more precision than practically any previous tradition, arrived at a completely different conclusion about the nature of calm. It's not a trait, it's a skill, and skills are built with training. Exactly like any other physical or technical skill, nobody expects to run a marathon without having trained. Nobody expects to play the piano without having practiced. Nobody expects to master a foreign language without having studied it. And yet, most people expect to have calm without having trained it. The logic is exactly the same. Calm is a skill. Skills are built with practice. If you haven't practiced, you don't have the skill, not because you're defective, but because nobody explained to you there was a practice. Picture this scene. Marcus Aurelius is in his meditations. He's not describing the nature of his calm as something he inherited or always had. He's describing the work he does to maintain it. He reminds himself of the principles he wants governing his behavior. He asks himself the questions that reorient him toward the perspective he wants to maintain. He prepares himself for the situations he knows will produce the impulse to react. That work, that constant and deliberate training, is what produces the calm. His meditations document not inherited calm, built calm. And what Marcus Aurelius built, you can also build, not with more time than he had, not with more favorable conditions, with the same work, the same training program, in the conditions you have. The difference between the reactive person and the calm person is not a difference of fixed character. It's a difference in accumulated practice. The reactive person has practiced reaction, not deliberately. But every time the emotion arrived, and the reaction followed it without any mediation, every time the impulse determined the behavior without there being a moment of choice, a bit more reactive capacity was built. The calm person has practiced calm, not always deliberately either. But at some point, in some way, they developed the habit of creating that instant of pause between the stimulus and the response. And every time that instant occurred, a bit more capacity for calm was built. Both are constructions, both are the result of accumulated practice, and the practice can change. That's what the first lesson says with all the clarity it deserves. The calm you don't have is not the calm you can't have. It's the calm you haven't trained yet, and the training starts today. With the first practice, with the first day of a program that, sustained with the consistency it requires, produces exactly what you describe in others as a gift. This is your assignment for this first lesson. Identify a specific area of your life where reactivity is most visible. A type of situation, a person, a context where the automatic reaction arrives before you've had time to choose. That area is the first target of your training, not the easiest, the most visible, because the training starts where you most clearly see that the muscle isn't developed. Write it down, with honesty, without softening it. That's the starting point. Second Stoic lesson. The Stoics were not naturally calm people. They were people who practiced calm every day until it became their way of being. This lesson expands what the first established with something that makes it even more powerful. Not only that calm is a skill that's trained, but that the models this episode proposes, the three men this episode gives you as reference, were not naturally calm. They were people who struggled, who had their own reactive impulses, who failed, who went back to practicing. Their texts document this with an honesty that would make it impossible to sustain. The image of the perfect sage who was never disturbed. Marcus Aurelius's meditations are the record of someone who has to remind himself every day what principles he wants governing his behavior. Why would he need to remind himself if he lived them completely naturally without any effort? He wouldn't need to. The fact that he writes them, that he reminds himself again and again, that he returns to the same themes with the consistency his pages show, reveals exactly what this lesson proposes. That Marcus Aurelius also had reactive impulses that daily training kept in check. That, without that training, those impulses would have determined his behavior with the same frequency they determine that of any person without that practice. Seneca's letters are the record of someone who writes about wisdom while simultaneously admitting his own limitations in reaching it. He wrote that in many ways he was still a sick man trying to recover, not a healthy man giving advice about health from the position of someone who already has it. And Epictetus's Enchiridion describes a training that would only make sense if untrained behavior were the default behavior. If calm were natural, the training to produce it would be unnecessary. All three practiced because without practice calm would not have been available. Exactly like you, exactly like any person. That changes something in the way you relate to the training process. If the models also had to practice, then the fact that you have to practice isn't a sign that you're further from them, from the calm you seek. It's the sign that you're in the same process they were in the process of training, which is the only process that leads where you want to go. Seneca articulated it with a clarity his letters consistently document. Don't compare yourself with the ideal sage who never existed. Compare yourself with who you were yesterday. Evaluate progress by the direction, not by the distance to the destination. That's exactly what Stoic training produces if practiced with that perspective. Not the perfection no human being has achieved. The progress any human being can accumulate if they practice with consistency. This is your assignment for this second lesson. Think about a person you admire for their calm. It can be someone from your personal life, a historical leader, any person whose equanimity you recognize as something that deserves respect. Now, ask yourself this question. What training would have produced that calm? Not perfect calm without work. The training that, practiced with consistency over sufficient time, would have built exactly what you see in that person. That image of the training that produces the calm you admire is the image of your own path, not the arrival, the path, which starts with today's practice. There's something the first two lessons together build that neither can build alone. The first says, calm is a skill that's trained. The second says, the models you propose also trained it. Together, they say something that completely changes the relationship you have with your own reactivity. You're not reactive because you're defective. You're reactive because you've practiced reaction. And that means you can stop being reactive, not instantly, not without work, not without the moments where the impulse keeps arriving before the training can intervene, but in a real and verifiable way, if you train with the consistency the program in this episode describes. That possibility, opened by the first two lessons, is exactly the foundation that makes the following 8 lessons actionable instead of just inspirational. Not the wish to be calmer, the understanding that calm is available through training, and the training starts today with the first practice, with the first morning, with the first irritation of the day used as a practice repetition instead of as a threat to peace. That's enough to start. And starting is exactly what the first two lessons are inviting you to do. Not tomorrow, today. With the identification of the area where the muscle most needs to be worked, with the image of the training that produces the calm you admire in others, and with the understanding that training is available to, exactly as it was available to Marcus Aurelius on military campaign, to Seneca in exile, to Epictetus in slavery, in the conditions they had, with the work that was worth it, every day, available to you, in the conditions you have. Now, there's more about the first lesson that deserves development, because it touches something practice without this development can misinterpret. The muscle of calm is not built in isolation from difficult situations, it's built in them. The person who avoids the situations that activate them isn't training calm. They're avoiding the gym. The person who faces those situations and deliberately practices a different response, even imperfectly, even with the reactive impulse still present, is training. That's the fundamental difference between Stoic training and any wellness practice that proposes finding peace by distancing yourself from what disturbs you. The Stoics trained in life, not in a meditation room separate from life. And that makes their practice infinitely more applicable to the real life of any person, because real life doesn't produce protected conditions where nothing disturbs. It produces exactly the opposite. Difficult people, unexpected obstacles, everyday irritations, situations that don't go as planned. And the Stoic, instead of seeing all that as the threat to their practice, sees it as the practice itself. Traffic isn't an obstacle to calm, it's the practice repetition where calm is built. The difficult email isn't an attack on your emotional state, it's the repetition where you train how to process that type of message from clarity instead of from reaction. The person who always activates you isn't the person who prevents your growth. They're the personal trainer, giving you exactly the training you most need. That reconfiguration, seeing irritations as the gym instead of as threats, is one of the most transformative this episode can produce. Not because it changes the situations, because it completely changes the relationship you have with them. And that different relationship is exactly what produces real training, available today in the next irritation that arrives, which could be in 10 minutes, for which you already have a different perspective. Use it. Before continuing with the second block, there's something about the first lesson that deserves to be explored with greater depth, because it touches the most important difference between whoever trains calm and whoever only wishes to have it. The difference between the wish and the practice. Practically everyone wishes to have more calm, more capacity to hold center when circumstances push toward reaction, more space between stimulus and response. Fewer moments where impulse determines behavior before choice is possible. That wish is universal, and yet trained calm is comparatively rare. Why? Because the wish without practice produces nothing. The muscle doesn't grow with the wish to have it more developed. It grows with training. And calm, which is a muscle exactly as the first lesson describes, doesn't grow with the wish to have it more developed. It grows with training. The person who understands that, who sees the difference between wishing for calm and training it, has exactly the clarity that makes it possible for this episode's program to work, because they're no longer seeking the instant transformation the wish expected. They're seeking the training practice produces, and training always produces. Not immediately, not dramatically, not with the speed the wish would have preferred, but in a real and verifiable way when practice is consistent. Marcus Aurelius understood it this way. His meditations are not the record of someone who wished to be wiser and expected that wisdom to arrive without work. They're the record of someone who actively worked to be it every day, in the conditions he had, with the time he had, and the result of that work, documented on those pages, is what arrived to today as the most read manual of mental fortitude in history. Not the wish of Marcus Aurelius, his practice. The practice is available to you, the wish you already have. The only thing missing is making the transition from wish to practice. And that transition starts with the identification of the area the first lesson asks of you, the place where the muscle most needs work, the place where the training starts. Do it today, with honesty, without softening what you see. That's the starting point. And the starting point, however uncomfortable it may be to see it clearly, is always the beginning of the right path, available to you now. There's more about the second lesson that connects with the entire arc of the series in a way that makes visible the accumulated work of 10 episodes. The second lesson says the Stoics were not naturally calm, that they practiced. But there's something that description doesn't fully say about why that practice produced what it produced in their specific cases. Epictetus's practice was verified under the most extreme conditions possible. A man in slavery who found calm not because his circumstances were favorable, but because he'd built something inside that circumstances couldn't destroy. Seneca's practice was verified in exile, in proximity to the most dangerous power of his era, in the growing certainty that time was running short. Circumstances that would have produced chronic anxiety in any person who hadn't built calm with the type of work he describes. And Marcus Aurelius's practice was verified in governing the most demanding world that has existed, with wars, plagues, betrayals, and losses that would have collapsed someone without the training. His Meditations document, all three verified under the most adverse conditions possible that trained calm doesn't depend on conditions to exist. That's exactly what the 10 previous episodes of this series have been building. Not the calm that exists when circumstances are favorable, the calm that exists when circumstances aren't. Built calm. The kind that survives the provocation episode 8 worked on. The kind that survives the anxiety episode 5 worked on. The kind that exists in the present, even though the future is uncertain, as episode 5 also taught. The kind that maintains the governance of the mind, episode 7 described. The kind that doesn't bite the hook, episode 8 examined. And the kind that examines the judgment, episode 9 identified as the root of all the work. 10 episodes of work building the same thing from different angles. The calm that doesn't depend on circumstances to exist. And this episode, the 10th, gives the training program that keeps that calm alive and growing day by day, with the 3 practices, with the consistency the program requires. That's what the first 2 lessons of this block established, the foundation of the work. Carry it into the following lessons with the clarity that you already have everything necessary to begin. The knowledge of the 10 previous lessons, the program of this episode's practices, and the decision to practice. That decision is the only thing missing, and it can be made now. There's something more the first and second lessons of this block need to say about the specific nature of the muscle of calm. The muscle of calm is not a single muscle. It's a family of muscles that work together. The muscle of the pause, the capacity to create that instant of space between stimulus and response before the automatic reaction closes the space. The muscle of judgment, the capacity to examine the interpretation the mind applies to the event before that interpretation determines the emotion that follows it. The muscle of choice, the capacity to deliberately choose the response instead of following the impulse, and the muscle of recovery, the capacity to return to center after losing it, with more speed and more smoothness as the training accumulates. These four muscles together are what the calm person has that the reactive person doesn't, not a difference of character, a difference in the development of four specific muscles. And like any muscle, each of them responds to specific training. The muscle of the pause is trained with the practice of deliberate breathing before responding. With the practice of the small moments Epictetus described, the muscle of judgment is trained with the examination of the automatic judgments the previous episode described, with the question of whether the judgment serves or harms. The muscle of choice is trained with each moment where choice occurs instead of reaction. Each of those moments adds capacity to the muscle, and the muscle of recovery is trained with the evening examination, with the honest review of the moments where center was lost, with the identification of what produced the loss and what would make the return faster next time. 4 muscles, 4 specific practices that develop them, 1 program that integrates them all. That's the program this episode delivers. And the 4 muscles, developed together with the consistency the program requires, produce exactly what you observe in the people you admire for their calm, not a gift, a family of well-trained muscles available to you with the same work that built them, in the conditions you have, starting today. Seneca described progress in terms that have been exactly right for 20 centuries. He said that when progress in the work of the mind is real, you don't feel you're making a great effort to control your reactions. Simply the reactions are less frequent, less intense, easier to interrupt when they appear. Not because the effort has disappeared, but because the training has automated enough of what previously required deliberate effort. That's what months of practice produce, not perfection. The progressive automation of what, at the beginning, cost effort. And that automation, visible in the difference between who you are today and who you'll be after months of consistent practice, is exactly the promise of the program. Not the promise of instant transformation. The promise of verifiable progress through training, available to you, if you do it, every day, in what you have, starting tomorrow morning. There's something this first block hasn't fully said about the muscle analogy that makes it more precise. Physical muscles have a characteristic the muscle of calm also shares. They're built faster when worked progressively, not starting with the heaviest weights, starting with the ones you can handle and gradually increasing as capacity grows. The athlete who tries to lift maximum weight from the first day doesn't build the muscle. They injure themselves. And after the recovery period, they start over from 0 or less. Calm training has exactly the same logic. Whoever tries to apply perfect calm in the most difficult situations from the first day of practice isn't training. They're frustrating themselves. And, after several failures, in the moments of greatest intensity, they conclude the work doesn't work for them. The conclusion is incorrect. What didn't work was starting with the heaviest weights. The correct training starts with the lightest, the smallest irritations, the most manageable annoyances, the moments where the impulse to react is real but not overwhelming. That's where the training starts. And as the muscle develops with those low-intensity repetitions, it becomes possible to apply the same work to higher-intensity situations, not overnight, week by week, month by month, progressively, with the same logic as the athlete who increases the weight gradually. That progressiveness is exactly what Epictetus described with the image of spilled oil and stolen wine. Start with the oil, with the wine, with the small, and from the small, build the capacity that will be available when the big arrives. Not because the big is the same as the small, but because the muscle built in the small has real capacity for the big. That's the progressive training of calm, available to you, starting today, with the smallest irritation of the day, not the biggest, the smallest. That's the first weight. And from there, the training progresses. Third, Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal every night, not because he had time to spare, but because he knew that the mind without daily training returns to chaos by default. This lesson contains something that's crucial for this episode's training program to work in practice. The understanding that the mind has a default state, and that default state is not calm, it's chaos. The chaos of automatic thoughts arriving uninvited, of judgments applied without being examined, of reactions occurring before choice is possible, of worries about the future devouring the present, of irritations accumulating and producing the permanent state of alert that anxiety describes. That's the default state of the human mind when it's not being actively trained, not because the mind is defective, because the mind was designed to respond to stimuli from the environment, not to maintain itself in a state of reflective calm without any active effort. Marcus Aurelius knew this, and that's why he wrote, "Picture this scene. It's a night in the campaign tent on the Danube frontier. The day has been long. The decisions made during the day have been heavy. The body is tired. The mind has been under constant pressure since dawn." And Marcus Aurelius opens his journal, not because he has energy to spare, not because the day has been light, but exactly because without that nightly work, the mind would return to what it returns to by default: the chaos of unexamined worries, the automatic judgments from the day's situations without any review, the patterns that would consolidate without the daily practice that interrupts them. The journal is the training that prevents that return to chaos. 15 minutes of conscious work that make the next day begin from a different point than it would have begun without that practice. Not better in the sense that everything will have been resolved, but better in the sense that the work of examining judgments and reviewing reactions will have occurred. And that work, accumulated night after night, gradually produces the mind Marcus Aurelius describes in his Meditations. Not the perfect mind that never fails, the mind that returns more quickly to center when it loses composure, that sees patterns with more clarity because it has recorded them with honesty, that makes decisions from more clarity because the noise of unexamined chaos doesn't occupy as much space. That's what the journal produces. The daily practice that interrupts the return to default chaos. Seneca articulated it in his Letters to Lucilius with the urgency of someone who knows time isn't infinite. He wrote that at the end of each day we should ask ourselves 3 things. What bad habit have I corrected today? What virtue have I practiced? In what am I better today than yesterday? Not as a severe examination that produces guilt, as the honest review of an athlete evaluating the day's training. What went well? What needs more work? What makes tomorrow's training more precise? Those 3 questions, answered with honesty each night, produce exactly what Marcus Aurelius sought in his journal: the visibility of the patterns, the information that makes the next day's more precise work possible, and the closure of the cycle of a day that, without that closure, would simply accumulate on top of the previous ones without any processing to make it useful for future work. This is your assignment for this 3rd lesson. Tonight, before sleeping, practice Seneca's 3 questions. What bad habit have I corrected today? What virtue have I practiced? In what am I better today than yesterday? You don't have to answer with an elaborate story. A few honest sentences are enough, but do it. Tonight, with the honesty the work requires, and then do it tomorrow night, and the next, because the value of the evening examination isn't in any individual night, it's in the accumulation of the foremost nights, in the visibility of patterns that only consistent recording can produce. Start it tonight. 4th Stoic lesson. Seneca recommended the nightly examination of conscience, where you review your complete day, not to punish yourself, but to improve tomorrow what you did wrong today. Seneca's evening examination has a characteristic that distinguishes it from other forms of reflection that can produce exactly the opposite effect from what they seek. That characteristic is the attitude with which it's done, not self-punishment, observation. There are people who, when they try to review their days with honesty, end up in a guilt cycle that produces more suffering than they had before the review. They saw where they failed, recorded where they lost center, identified the reactions they hadn't chosen, and from that visibility, instead of using the information to improve the next day's training, they used it to build a case against themselves. I'm reactive. I always am. I'll never change. This work doesn't work for me. That cycle, that use of the visibility of failure as evidence of the uselessness of the effort, is exactly what Seneca warned against. The evening examination is not a court where you judge yourself. It's a training review where you evaluate the day's work. The athlete who reviews their training and sees that certain techniques need more work doesn't say, "I'm a terrible athlete and I'll never be better." They say, "These techniques need more work. Tomorrow's training will include them with greater emphasis." That's exactly the attitude of the Stoic evening examination. Where did I lose center today? Not, why am I so reactive and so undisciplined? What automatic judgment produced the disturbance I experienced? Not, how could I have reacted so poorly to something so small? What will I do differently tomorrow when a similar situation arrives? Not, I'll probably do the same thing again because I never learn. The attitude of the observer instead of the judge. The perspective of the athlete evaluating the training instead of the accused examining their guilt. Picture this scene of Seneca in his villa on the outskirts of Rome. He's had a difficult day. There will have been moments where his principles and his reactions didn't perfectly coincide. There will have been situations where the impulse arrived before choice was possible. And Seneca, before sleeping, reviews that day, not with shame, with the curiosity of the researcher examining evidence. What happened exactly in that moment where I lost calm? What judgment was operating? What would have produced a different result? Those questions, asked with the attitude of the observer, produce information, not guilt. And that information, carried to the next day, makes the training more precise. That's the evening examination in its most useful version, not the flagellation of whoever didn't meet the standards. The review of whoever wants tomorrow to be better than today. This is your assignment for this fourth lesson. When you do tonight's evening examination, practice the attitude of the observer. When you identify a moment where you lost center, don't add the judgment that this says something permanent and definitive about who you are. Just record what happened. What was the event? What was the judgment that produced the disturbance? What would have produced a different result? Without self-punishment. Without the story that you're hopelessly reactive. Without the prediction that it will always be this way. Just the information. And, from the information, the trainer's question, what makes tomorrow's training more effective? That question, at the end of the evening examination, closes the cycle correctly, not with guilt, with the commitment to the next training. Do it tonight. Fifth Stoic lesson. Epictetus taught that we should practice first with the small things, with the minor annoyances, because whoever can't maintain calm before the insignificant will never maintain it before the serious. This is the most practical lesson of the 10, and also the most counterintuitive, because when most people think about training calm, they think about the big moments, the important crises, the high-intensity situations where calm would really make a difference. And they wait for those moments. But when those moments come, calm isn't available. Why? Because it wasn't trained. And it wasn't trained because the training was being saved for the big moments instead of being done in the small ones. Epictetus taught it with an image that perfectly captures the logic of progressive training. He said that when the oil spills and the wine is stolen, instead of being disturbed by it, remind yourself that this is the price of tranquility, not as resignation before small losses, as the understanding that every small annoyance is an opportunity to pay exactly the type of price that builds calm. The irritation over spilled oil seems trivial, but the way you respond to spilled oil is exactly the same way you'll respond to the more important things when they arrive, not a different version. The same. If you practice the automatic reaction with spilled oil, you'll have the automatic reaction when something arrives that really matters. If you practice the pause and the choice with spilled oil, you'll have that pause and that choice available when what arrives is what really matters. Training with the small builds the capacity that will be available in the big. Picture this scene. You're in traffic. The driver ahead doesn't start when the light turns green. The horn from behind begins. The time you needed to arrive on time is slipping away. That's a training repetition, exactly as valuable as any more elaborate session of philosophical practice. Do you respond with the frustration the impulse carries? Or do you use that instant, that space between the green light and the horn, to deliberately choose how to respond? The deliberate choice in that moment, though it seems insignificant, builds something real. The habit of choosing. The habit of making that instant of pause before the automatic reaction determines the behavior. And that habit, built in the small everyday moments, is the same habit that will be available in the big moments when they arrive. Marcus Aurelius practiced it this way. His meditations record not only reflections on the great questions of his governance, they also record the work with small, everyday irritations, the people who bothered him in minor ways, the inconveniences of daily life that anyone could consider too insignificant to merit philosophical attention. Marcus Aurelius paid them attention precisely because he understood that it was in those small moments where the capacity he needed for the big moments was built or eroded. This is your assignment for this 5th lesson. Today, identify 3 moments where a minor annoyance activates the impulse to react. It can be traffic, the difficult email, the long line, the irritating news, the comment you normally let pass but that today you decide to use as training. In each of those 3 moments, practice the pause before the reaction. An instant, a breath. The question, does this deserve my peace? And then choose. Not the automatism, the choice. 3 practice repetitions today. That's training with the small. That's exactly what Epictetus taught at his school in Nicopolis. And that's what builds the calm that will. Be available when what really matters arrives. Do it today. With the 3 annoyances the day already has prepared for you. There's something lessons 3, 4, and 5 together build that none can build separately. All 3 speak of the same training program from 3 different angles. The 3rd speaks of why the training has to be daily. Because the mind returns to chaos by default if it's not worked on. The 4th speaks of the correct attitude for the training, not self-punishment. The observation of the athlete evaluating their work. And the 5th speaks of the material of the training. The small annoyances that are available every day as practice repetitions. All 3 together describe the complete structure of daily practice. Daily work because chaos is the default state. Observational work because self-punishment erodes instead of building. Work with the small because that's where the capacity for the big is built. That structure, practiced with the consistency it requires, produces exactly what the 1st and 2nd lessons promised. Built calm, not hoped for, or wished for, or inherited calm. The kind born from work. And that work, described in these 3 lessons, is completely accessible. It doesn't require special conditions, doesn't require time you don't have, doesn't require dramatic one-time transformations, just daily practice. The evening examination with Seneca's questions, the attitude of the observer who evaluates without punishing, and the 3 practice repetitions with the day's annoyances. That's the minimum viable program, the one Marcus Aurelius would do if he had your life and your conditions, the one Epictetus described with the image of spilled oil and stolen wine, the one Seneca articulated with the 3 questions at the end of the day, available to you tonight, with the questions, with the attitude, with today's 3 repetitions. Start it now, before. Continuing with the 3rd block. There's something about the 5th lesson that deserves additional development because it touches something practice without this development can underestimate. The importance of frequency over intensity. 3 practice repetitions with small annoyances each day produces more real calm than 1 intense session of philosophical practice once a week. Not because intense sessions don't have value. They do, but because calm is built in the nervous system, in the response patterns the nervous system has available in real time, and those patterns are modified with frequent repetition more than with occasional intensity. The athlete who trains 30 minutes daily for 6 days a week develops more capacity than the one who trains 3 hours one day, doesn't return to the gym until the following week. The same logic applies to training calm. 3 practice repetitions today 3 tomorrow, 3 the day after. That frequency, sustained with the consistency the program requires, gradually produces the change in response patterns that no amount of occasional practice can produce. Seneca documented it in his letters with precision. He wrote that progress isn't measured by great leaps of advancement, but by the consistent accumulation of small improvements, that whoever advances a little each day, without interruption, arrives much further than whoever makes great occasional efforts separated by long periods of inactivity. Consistency is the most important ingredient of the training. Not intensity, not perfection. Consistency. 3 repetitions today, 3 tomorrow, 3 the day after. That's the training of calm. Simple in its description, powerful in its accumulation, available to you today. With the 3 annoyances the day has prepared, use them. Before closing the second block, there's something about the third and fourth lessons that connects them in a way that makes something important visible. The third lesson speaks of the nightly work, the journal, the training that prevents the return to chaos. The fourth speaks of the attitude for that work, the observer instead of the judge. Information instead of guilt. But there's something the two together say about the journal that neither says separately. The journal is not just a recording tool, it's a conversation tool, a conversation between who you are now and who you want to be. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, he wasn't simply documenting what had happened during the day. He was speaking with the version of himself he wanted to reach, reminding it of the principles that version valued, examining the distance between that version and the one from the day that had just ended, and establishing the intention to reduce that distance the next day. That conversation, that relationship between who you are and who you want to be documented in the journal, is what makes the evening examination something much more powerful than a simple review of events. It's the most honest mirror you can have, not the mirror that reflects only what you want to see, the mirror that reflects what really happened. And from that reflection, the possibility of adjusting the path. Seneca used his letters to Lucilius as that mirror, not just letters to a friend, letters to himself, reflections on the distance between what he preached and what he lived, between the principles he articulated with such clarity and the moments where those principles hadn't governed his behavior with the same clarity. That honesty about the distance is exactly what makes the evening examination the instrument of transformation the Stoics described. Not the large or small distance, but the honesty about the distance, and the attitude with which that honesty is received, not the judgment that destroys, the observation that informs. The two lessons together give you that, the nightly work that produces the reflection, and the attitude that allows using that reflection to grow instead of to destroy yourself. Start them tonight with the journal, with Seneca's questions, with the attitude of the observer, and with the conversation between who you are and who you want to be. That conversation, sustained with honesty night after night, gradually produces what no abstract aspiration can produce: character, the person who results from training, not the person you wish to be, the one you build, practice by practice, available to you tonight, with the journal, and with the honesty the work requires. There's something about the fifth lesson, practicing with the small, that connects directly with something the second episode of this series established: the space between stimulus and response. In that second episode, You learn that between what happens to you and what you do, there's an instant, sometimes very small, sometimes so small it seems not to exist, but always present, and that in that instant resides all your freedom. This episode's 5th lesson gives you exactly the material with which that space is trained. The small annoyances. Each small annoyance is a stimulus. The automatic reaction is the response. And between the two, there's that instant where the space can appear. When the oil spills and the wine is stolen, Epictetus said you need to tell yourself, this is the price of tranquility, not as resignation, as the recognition that this specific moment is exactly the practice opportunity the training needs. The instant where the impulse to be irritated arrives, and where the choice can happen. Breathe. Ask yourself, does this deserve my peace? And choose. That sequence, practiced in the small annoyances, is exactly the same one you need available in the big situations. The same, not a different version. The instant, the breath, the question, the choice, in traffic, in the long line, with the difficult email. And then, when what really matters arrives, in the difficult conversation, in the real loss, in the situation that genuinely tests everything the work of this series has built, the sequence will already be available. Not because you memorized it, because you practiced it, hundreds of times in the small annoyances the day naturally produces. That's exactly what Epictetus taught, not the heroism of whoever maintains calm in the great crisis without having practiced anything. The work of whoever converts each everyday irritation into a practice repetition, and who, when the great crisis arrives, has available exactly the capacity the repetitions built. Marcus Aurelius did it this way. His meditations record the work with irritations that would have seemed too small to merit philosophical attention were it not that he understood. It was exactly in those irritations where character was built or eroded. The official who arrived late, the advisor who didn't tell the complete truth, the day that didn't go as planned. Small irritations, great practice opportunities, used exactly as such. This is the most practical understanding of the 5th lesson. Today already has the practice repetitions you need prepared, without needing to create special conditions, without needing to search for training situations. The training is in the situations that are already there. It only needs you to use them as what they are, the gym of calm, available today, with each irritation, with each minor annoyance, with each moment where the impulse to react arrives before choice has had time to participate. Those moments are the training program. Use them today. Before closing the second block, there's something about the 3rd and 5th lessons together that makes visible how the nightly program and the daily program feed each other. The evening examination, the 3rd lesson, describes reviews what happened during the day, and what happened during the day includes exactly the 3 practice repetitions with the small that the 5th lesson proposes. Those repetitions, when recorded honestly in the evening examination, produce high-quality information about the training. Which repetitions worked? In which did the impulse arrive too fast for choice to intervene? What type of irritation produced the smallest space? That information, carried to the next day's morning preparation, makes the anticipation more precise. If the evening examination revealed that the type of difficult email produces the fastest impulse, the morning preparation can specifically include the anticipation of that type of communication. If it revealed that 5 o'clock traffic is where the space closes most frequently. The morning preparation can include the specific decision of how to respond to that afternoon's traffic. The cycle feeds itself. The evening examination informs the morning preparation. The morning preparation makes the first of day's practice repetitions more effective. The practice repetitions produce the most valuable information for the evening examination. That cycle, maintained with the consistency the 8th lesson describes, is exactly what produces the verifiable progress the training promises. Not dramatically on any individual day, in accumulated fashion through the days, until the difference between who you were at the start and who you are now is visible to you, to those around you, to the journal's record that documents the work. That's the program in its most complete version. The cycle of 3 practices that feed each other, that produce accumulated progress, that build the calm this progress. Episode promises available to you. Tonight with the examination, tomorrow morning with the preparation, and during the day with the 3 repetitions. That's the program, complete, executable, powerful in its accumulation. Start it tonight. There's something about the 4th lesson, Seneca's evening examination, that deserves to be presented with greater concreteness, because it's the practice where most people have difficulties in implementation. The difficulty usually isn't time. 5 or 10 minutes before sleeping is time most confined. The difficulty is honesty. The evening examination requires seeing clearly the moments where the work didn't work, where the reaction arrived before choice could intervene, where the impulse determined behavior without any deliberate mediation. And seeing yourself that way, seeing it clearly and without softening it, can be uncomfortable, especially in the first days of practice when the contrast between who you are and who you want to be is more visible than the distance the training has already covered. Seneca anticipated this in his letters. He wrote that the first evening examinations frequently reveal more than one would like to see, that the mirror of honest examination isn't gentle, and that this is exactly its value, not the mirror that shows what you want to see, the one that shows what's really there. And that honest vision, though uncomfortable, is exactly what makes real progress possible, because you can't work with what you can't see, and the evening examination makes it visible. The key to that visibility being an instrument of growth instead of a source of discouragement is exactly the attitude the 4th lesson describes. The observer, not the judge. When the evening examination reveals a moment where you lost calm, the useful response isn't condemnation, it's curiosity. What happened exactly in that moment? What automatic judgment produced it? What would I do differently if I could return to that moment? And what makes tomorrow's training more effective for that type of situation? Those 4 questions, asked with the curiosity of the researcher instead of the verdict of the judge, convert the moment of failure into the most valuable material of the training, not despite what they reveal, thanks to what they reveal. Seneca called his moments of failure the most honest teachers he had, more honest than books, more honest than philosophical conversations, because they showed exactly where the work continued to be necessary, without theory, without ambiguity, with the precision only direct experience can produce. Use the evening examination this way, tonight, with the 4 questions, with the attitude of the curious observer, and with the gratitude of whoever knows that what it reveals is exactly what they needed to see so that the next day's work is more effective. That's the evening examination in its most useful version, available tonight before sleeping, without the phone, with the journal, or simply with closed eyes, and the honest review. 5 or 10 minutes, every day, without exception. Sixth Stoic lesson. The Stoics' morning meditation consisted of anticipating the day's difficulties so that none would catch them by surprise and steal the peace they had built. This lesson describes the first of the 3 practices of the Stoic training program. The morning preparation, 5 minutes before the day starts, before checking the phone. Before the news and the messages and the world's demands begin to bombard the mind with their stimuli, 5 minutes to anticipate, not to plan the day in terms of tasks and agenda. That's useful, but it's different. To anticipate emotionally, what type of situations might the day bring that will test calm? Are there difficult conversations that will probably occur? Are there people whose behavior I already know can activate me? Are there known obstacles that can produce frustration? Those questions, asked in the calm of the morning, produce something no amount of logistical planning can produce. Emotional preparation. When you know in advance that the day will probably bring a certain difficult situation, and when in the morning's calm you've made the decision of how you want to respond if that situation arrives, the instant of decision in the real moment has more available space, not because the preparation eliminates the difficulty, but because it eliminates the surprise. And surprise, as you learned in the previous episode of this series, is what closes the space between stimulus and response that makes choice possible. Marcus Aurelius described his morning practice in his Meditations with a frankness that makes visible exactly what it's about. He wrote that, upon waking he would tell himself, "Today I will encounter people who are intrusive, ungrateful, arrogant, disloyal, malicious," not as a pessimistic prophecy about what the day would be like, as honest preparation for the reality any day of governance could produce. And having anticipated those possibilities in the morning's calm, when one of those people appeared during the day, the mind already had a context to receive them. Not the surprise that closes the space, the context that expands it. I anticipated it. This is exactly what I had anticipated. My response to this was already decided this morning from calm. That's the function of the morning preparation, not the planning of the chaos the day might bring, the anticipated decision of how you want to respond to chaos from the calm of whoever foresaw it. How to do it in practice. Upon waking, before checking the phone, sit on the bed or stand beside it. 5 minutes. No more. First, remember what's under your control today and what isn't, not in the abstract. In the context of the specific day you have ahead. Second, honestly anticipate the situations that could be difficult. The people whose behavior you already know can activate you. The circumstances that have the potential to produce frustration. Third, decide from calm how you want to respond to those situations, not the exact script, the intention. From what place you want to respond, from reaction or from choice, from impulse or from the principles you want governing your behavior. 5 minutes. Every day. That's the Stoic morning preparation. This is your assignment for this 6th lesson. Tomorrow morning, before checking the phone, practice the morning preparation. The full 5 minutes, with the 3 parts. What's under your control, the anticipated difficulties, the decision of how you want to respond, and observe whether the day unfolds differently when you start it this way. Not dramatically different the first time, slightly different. And that slight difference, accumulated morning after morning over weeks and months, produces real transformation. Do it tomorrow morning, without exception. 7th Stoic lesson. Your mind does what it practices. If you practice reaction, you'll be reactive. If you practice calm, you'll be calm. And until now, you've only practiced reaction. This lesson contains the most uncomfortable truth of the 10. Until now, you've only practiced reaction, not deliberately, not with the intention of becoming someone reactive, but because practice happens regardless, chosen or not, and what's practiced consolidates. Every time the stimulus arrived and reaction followed it without any mediation, a bit more reactive capacity was built. The pattern of responding from impulse became a bit more automatic, a bit faster, a bit harder to interrupt. Not because you're weak, but because the practice of reaction is the practice you had available in the absence of any other. Nobody taught you the space between stimulus and response. Nobody showed you that judgment could be examined. Nobody gave you the Stoic training program. And without those tools, the practice that occurred was the only one the mind found naturally available: reaction. But that practice can change, not because the mind works differently, but because the mind does what it practices. And if you change the practice, over time you change what the mind does automatically. Seneca articulated it in his letters with an image that remains exactly right 2,000 years later. He said, "The mind is like water. It takes the form of the container that holds it, and the container is the practice you give it. If the container is reaction, the mind takes the form of reaction. If the container is trained calm, the mind gradually takes that form, not all at once, not without resistance, not without the moments where the old form tries to recover its space, but with time, with practice. With the consistency this episode's program describes. The mind takes the form it's given. That's what the 7th lesson tells you. That the practice of calm produces calm. Exactly as the practice of reaction produced reactivity, the process is the same. The result is different, because the practice is different. This is your assignment for this 7th lesson. Identify at what moment of the day the practice of reaction is most visible. The moment where the impulse to react arrives with the most consistency and the most speed. That's exactly the place where the new training must begin, not the most comfortable place, the most necessary, because the muscle that most needs work is the one that's been least exercised. And the work on that specific muscle, done with the consistency of the program, produces the most significant changes. Identify it, name it, and use it as the specific target of your training. 8th Stoic lesson. The Stoics understood that a day without practice is a day the mind returns to its old patterns, which is why consistency matters more than intensity. This lesson is what differentiates whoever transforms calm permanently from whoever experiences periods of improvement followed by returns to the starting point. Consistency. There are people who do the work intensely for some days or some weeks and then abandon it because they don't see the results they expected in that time. And when they return to the starting point, they conclude the work doesn't work. The conclusion is incorrect. What didn't work wasn't the work. It was the lack of consistency. Because calm isn't built in bursts of intense practice separated by periods of abandonment. It's built in the daily accumulation of consistent practice. A day without practice doesn't destroy everything built. That would be discouraging and inaccurate. But a day without practice is a day where the mind returns a bit toward its default patterns. A day where the chaos the training keeps at bay recovers a bit of the territory it had ceded. And if those days accumulate, if the practice is interrupted for long enough, the return to the starting point becomes reality. Not because the previous work was useless, but because without the maintenance daily practice provides, the previous patterns gradually recover their space, exactly like physical muscles that atrophy with disuse. Marcus Aurelius understood this. That's why he wrote every day, not only when he had time, not only when circumstances were favorable, every day, on military campaign, in the palace, on the days of greatest pressure, on the days of greatest fatigue, every day. Because he knew a day without practice was a day where the mind returned to what it returns to by default. And that default, that natural state of the untrained mind, was incompatible with the type of ruler and the type of man he wanted to be. Consistency doesn't require perfection. There are days where the practice will be lighter, days where the 5 morning minutes reduce to 2, days where the evening examination is briefer than ideal. That's fine. What's not fine is complete abandonment, the commitment to do something every day, even if some days it's less than ideal, is infinitely more valuable than the commitment to do it perfectly some days and abandon it on others. Seneca formulated it with the clarity that characterizes his best writing. He said that in philosophical practice, as in any practice, advancement comes from consistency, not from intensity. Whoever advances a little each day, without interruption, arrives much further than whoever makes great occasional efforts. That's exactly what this episode's program requires. Not the perfection of each day, consistency through all the days. This is your assignment for this 8th lesson. Make a decision about this episode's training program. Not the decision to try it with enthusiasm while motivation lasts. The decision to do the 3 practices every day for the next 30 days. 30 days, without exception. Without the days where you don't have time or energy. If on some day you can only do 2 minutes instead of 5, do the 2 minutes. If on some night you can only do 1 question instead of 3, do the 1 question. But every day, without exception. That consistency, sustained over 30 days, will produce something no intense session can produce. The habit. And the installed habit produces the sustained calm this episode promises. Not at the end of 30 days in a dramatic and definitive way, in a gradual and verifiable way as the days accumulate. Make that decision today and start it tomorrow morning. With the 5 minutes before checking the phone, there's something about lessons 6, 7, and 8 together that makes visible the complete architecture of the training program. The 6th describes the morning practice, the entry point to the day from deliberate calm instead of from the impulse of immediate reactivity. The 7th describes why the training changes the mind permanently, because the mind does what it practices, and changing the practice changes the mind. And the 8th describes the most determinant factor of the result, consistency over intensity, day by day over occasional effort. All 3 together build the understanding that the program works not because of the brilliance of each individual practice, but because of the architecture of the whole. The morning preparation establishes the day's intention. Practice with the small throughout the day builds the habit of choice instead of automatism, and the evening examination closes the cycle and prepares the next day. Those three practices, sustained with the consistency the 8th lesson describes, gradually produce the change the 7th lesson promises. The mind that does what it practices eventually practices calm. So automatically, that calm becomes the default state. Not chaos, calm. That's the program's destination. Not reached dramatically, built practice by practice, day by day, with the consistency that distinguishes whoever transforms from whoever only experiments. That's what the 3rd block of lessons built. Carry it into the 4th block with the clarity that the program is complete. The 3 practices. Consistency. The mind that does what it practices, available to you, starting tomorrow morning before checking the phone. There's more about the morning practice that deserves to be fully developed, because it's the practice most people abandon most quickly. The reason for abandonment is frequently the same. The first days, the morning preparation produces something visible. The day seems to unfold with more clarity. There are moments where the anticipation worked, and where the decision made in the morning was available in the real moment. But, toward the end of the first week, the novelty fades. The initial enthusiasm drops. Some days the preparation seems to produce no visible effect, and the question arrives, is it worth continuing to do this? Seneca and Marcus Aurelius's answer would be immediate, yes, not because each individual day produces a visible result, but because the accumulation of the days does. Physical training also doesn't produce visible results day by day. Whoever goes to the gym on Tuesday doesn't see more muscles on Wednesday than on Monday. But whoever goes to the gym 5 days a week for 3 months does produce a visible difference. Calm training works exactly the same way. 1 day of morning preparation doesn't produce a visible transformation. 30 days of consistent morning preparation does produce something others notice, that you notice, that your journal's record can document. The greater frequency of moments where calm was available, the greater speed of calm. Return to center when you lost it. The greater visibility of your patterns, because you've recorded them with consistency. That's what 30 days produce. And that's exactly why it's worth continuing the patterns. Morning preparation, even on the days where it doesn't seem to produce anything. Those days are also building something. The consistency, the visible days can't build alone. Tomorrow, before checking the phone. 5 minutes, every day, without exception. That's the commitment. Before closing the 3rd block, there's something about lessons 7 and 8 that connects in a way that makes visible something about the training that neither says individually. The 7th says the mind does what it practices. The 8th says consistency matters more than intensity. Together, they produce something that's not just a statement about training. It's a verifiable promise. If you practice with consistency, the mind changes. Not dramatically, not instantly, but in a real and verifiable way. And that promise, unlike the promise of instant transformation that never arrives, has the advantage of being testable. It can be verified. In the journal's record after 30 days. In the frequency with which the space appears between stimulus and response, compared with the frequency a month ago. In the speed with which center is recovered after losing it. In the visibility of patterns that previously operated below the level of consciousness, and that can now be seen and examined. That verification, that concrete evidence that the training produces what it promises, is the most motivating thing that exists for continuing the practice. Not this episode's words, the direct experience that it works. And that direct experience is only available to whoever practices, not to whoever wishes it, to whoever does it. The 8 previous episodes gave the understanding. This episode gives the program, and the program only produces its result when implemented every day. With the consistency the 8th lesson describes, with the long-term vision the 7th lesson justifies. Those 2 lessons together tell you something simple and completely verifiable. If you do the work, the mind changes, not if you wish it, if you do it. That's the promise of Stoic training. Verifiable, available, starting tomorrow morning. There's more this 3rd block needs to say about the morning practice that none of the previous lessons fully captures. The morning preparation isn't only for anticipating difficulties, it's also for remembering who you want to be, not in the sense of an empty positive affirmation, in the sense of deliberately renewing the connection with the principles you want governing your behavior during the day. The same principle Marcus Aurelius practiced when he asked himself what type of person he wanted to be. Day. Not what tasks he was going to complete, what type of person he was going to be while completing them. That question, asked in the morning's calm before the day starts pushing, produces something no task planning can produce. The orientation of character toward the type of response you want to have when circumstances press. When the colleague says what he always says, that activates you. What type of person do you want to be in that moment? When the plan falls apart without warning, what type of person do you want to be while managing it? When the small irritation of traffic or the difficult email arrives, what type of person do you want to be in that practice repetition? Those questions, answered in the morning, from calm, produce an orientation that's available during the day as the anchor to return to when circumstances push in another direction. Exactly as Marcus Aurelius used it, the morning preparation as the anchor, the days, circumstances as the tests, and the evening examination as the evaluation of how many times the anchor held and how many it was dragged. That complete cycle, practiced with consistency, produces the character the meditations document, available to you starting tomorrow morning with the 5 minutes, before checking the phone, always before the phone. There's something about the 7th lesson that deserves additional development because it touches something practice without this development can misinterpret. The 7th lesson says, the mind does what it practices. That can be interpreted as meaning the change happens completely automatically with sufficient practice. That a moment arrives where calm is the natural state without any effort. That interpretation is partially correct, but omits something important. The change doesn't eliminate the reactive impulse. It modifies the relationship you have with it. After months of training, the impulse to react keeps arriving. Traffic keeps producing the irritation signal in the nervous system. The difficult comment keeps producing the discomfort signal. The situation that didn't go as planned keeps producing the frustration signal. What changes is what happens after that signal. The signal arrives, and instead of the automatic reaction following it immediately, there's a space, an instant, that with sufficient practice is large enough for choice to occur. The trained mind is not the mind that doesn't feel the impulse. It's the mind where between the impulse and the response there is consistently that instant of choice. That's what practice builds, not insensitivity, the space. And that space, more consistent and larger with each month of training, is exactly the difference between the person who seems so calm to you and who you were before this work. They also feel the impulse, but they have the space. You can have that space too. With the programs, training, day by day, practice by practice, consistency by consistency, the space grows. That's the promise of the 7th lesson when fully understood. Not the absence of impulse, the presence of the space. And the space is built in the gym of every day. Irritations. With the practice repetitions of the 5th lesson, with the morning preparation of the 6th, and with the evening examination, the 3rd and 4th describe the complete program available to you tomorrow morning before checking the phone. There's more about the 8th lesson, consistency, that connects with something this block hasn't said yet. Consistency doesn't only matter because of the accumulation it produces, it also matters because it establishes identity. There's a fundamental difference between someone who trains calm from time to time and someone who trains calm every day, not only in the training's result, in identity. The first is someone who sometimes practices calm. The second is someone who is a person who practices calm. That difference in identity, though it may seem semantic, has real practical consequences. The person who practices from time to time has to make the decision to practice each time they consider whether they'll do it. The person who practices every day no longer makes that decision. It's already made. It's who they are. And whoever is already a person who practices calm doesn't need the day's motivation to do it. They do it as part of who they are. Exactly like someone who does physical exercise every day doesn't need to decide each morning whether they'll do it. It's part of their identity. They do it because it's who they are. Marcus Aurelius didn't decide each night whether he was going to write in his journal. He was the one who wrote in his journal every day without the need to regenerate. Motivation for each session. That's what the consistency of 30 days produces. Beyond the training's results, it produces identity. The person who practices calm every day, and that identity, once established, becomes the most powerful source of consistency itself. Not the motivation that fluctuates, the identity that remains. That's the real goal of the 30 days, the 8th lesson proposes. Not just the training's results during that time. The installation of the identity of whoever practices calm every day, without exception, because it's who they are. Start it tomorrow morning with the 5 minutes. As the person who practices calm every day, because it's who you are now. There's more about the 6th lesson, the morning preparation, that connects with something the complete series has built, and that this episode can articulate with more precision. The morning preparation isn't only for the day that's coming, it's for the type of person you want to be every day. There are 2 ways to start the morning. The first is reactive. The phone rings or the alarm activates the day's cycle, and the mind enters response mode to the stimuli the world starts producing. The first email sets the emotional tone of the first hour. The first piece of news sets the worry level for the rest of the morning. The first difficult conversation arrives without any prepared context, and produces the reaction it produces without any anticipation to soften it. The second is proactive. Before external stimuli begin bombarding the mind, There are 5 minutes of deliberate work. The orientation toward the principles you want governing the day. The anticipation of the difficulties that will probably arrive. The decision of who you want to be when they arrive. The first way produces the reactive day. The second produces the day with intention, not perfectly. Not without the moments where reactivity recovers ground, but with a difference that becomes more visible over time. Marcus Aurelius used his morning preparation to establish exactly that intention. Not the planning of tasks, the orientation of character. What type of ruler do I want to be today? What type of man? How do I want to respond when the difficult people arrive, which they will? How do I want to handle the difficult decisions, which there will be? Those questions, answered in the morning's calm, produce something that can't be produced after the day has already started pushing, the anticipated orientation of character. And that orientation, though it doesn't guarantee the day will unfold perfectly, does significantly change the probability that the principles you want governing your behavior will be available when you need them most. That's the morning preparation in its most complete version, not the 5 minutes of the problemant technique. The orientation of character those 5 minutes produce. Available tomorrow morning. Before the phone. Before the world starts determining who you're going to be that day. Those 5 minutes are yours. To determine it yourself. Use them every day, without exception. There's more this third block needs to add before closing about the concept of training that unites the 3 lessons. The 6th, 7th, and 8th lessons together describe a system. The 6th describes the entry to the system, the morning preparation that establishes the intention. The 7th describes the system's mechanism, the mind that does what it practices and that changes its form when the practice changes. The 8th describes the system's fuel, the consistency that keeps it running through sufficient time for the changes to install. Without the morning preparation, the day starts reactive, and the training has no structured entry point. Without the understanding that the mind does what it practices, consistency doesn't have the motivational foundation it needs to sustain itself. And without consistency, neither the most perfect morning preparation nor the clearest understanding of the mechanism produces the results the system promises. All 3 elements are necessary, and all 3 are completely available to any person willing to implement them. The time they require is minimal. 5 minutes in the morning, attention during the day, 5 to 10 minutes at night. The conditions they require are the ones you already have. Your ordinary life with its everyday irritations as the gym, and the commitment they require is one you can make right now. The decision to practice every day, without exception, for the next 30 days. Not the promise of perfection, the commitment to consistency. That commitment, made today and honored tomorrow morning before checking the phone, is the beginning of the system. And the system, sustained with the consistency the 8th lesson describes, produces exactly what the 7th lesson promises. The mind that does what it practices, that practices calm, that progressively becomes a mind where calm is more automatic than reactivity. That's the system's destination, reached practice by practice, day by day, without exception, available to you, starting tomorrow morning with the 5 minutes. Before the phone, always before the phone. 9th, Stoic lesson. Training calm is not meditating an hour a day. It's consciously choosing your response in each small situation until the choice becomes automatic. This lesson eliminates the biggest obstacle preventing most people from starting the training: the mistaken idea of what the training requires. Many people associate mental or emotional training with meditation in the most common sense of the term. Sitting in silence for long periods, learning not to think, developing a practice that requires specific conditions and significant time. And when conditions aren't ideal, when time isn't available, when life doesn't cooperate with the space the practice seems to require, the training doesn't happen. Epictetus taught something completely different. Stoic training doesn't require leaving life to practice. It happens in life, in each situation where the impulse to react arrives and where conscious choice can interrupt it. That's the training, not a separate hour-long session. Dozens of practice repetitions distributed throughout the day, in the moments where real stimuli produce real impulses. And that, paradoxically, makes Stoic training more accessible than any practice that requires special conditions, because the stimuli that produce the impulses are available every day, at any hour, in any context. The traffic on the way to work, the difficult email that arrives at 9 in the morning, the conversation that takes an unexpected turn, the plan that falls apart without warning, the person who does what they always do that activates you. Each of those moments is a practice repetition, not the obstacle to training, the training itself. The only thing that converts those moments into practice instead of automatic reactivity is the conscious decision to use them that way. The pause, the breath, the question of who you want to be in that moment, and the choice, not the automatism, the choice. That choice, repeated enough times in enough situations, produces exactly what the 7th lesson described. The mind does what it practices. And when the practice is choosing instead of reacting, gradually choosing becomes what the mind does more automatically. Not perfect, not immediate, but real, verifiable in the record of who you were 3 months ago compared with who you are today, if the practice has been consistent. Seneca articulated it with the directness that characterizes his best writing. He said, "Philosophical progress isn't measured by the amount of theory learned, but by the difference between how you responded before and how you respond now. Not how many Stoicism books you've read. How much more space there is between the stimulus and your response. How much more frequent the moment is where you choose instead of react. That's progress. And that's exactly what training in real life produces. This is your assignment for this 9th lesson. For the next 7 days, keep a very simple record of the conscious choices you make instead of the automatic reactions. Not an elaborate record, just a mark. A signal that, in that moment, there was a choice instead of an automatism. At the end of 7 days, observe the number. Don't compare it with any external standard. Compare it with your own previous week. How many conscious choices were there this week that wouldn't have occurred without the practice? That number, small or large, is the measure of the training, and that number can grow with the consistency of practice. Keep the record. 7 days, starting today. 10th Stoic lesson. Today, your real training begins. You're going to implement 3 simple Stoic practices that you'll do each day until calm is your natural state and not your exception. This is the lesson that converts everything before it into a concrete and actionable program. Not tomorrow, today. The program has 3 practices, all accessible, all doable within the ordinary life you already have. The first practice is the morning preparation. Upon waking, before checking the phone, 5 minutes. Remember what's under your control and what isn't. Anticipate the difficulties the day can bring. And decide from calm how you want to respond when they arrive, not the planning of the agenda. Emotional preparation, 5 minutes every day. Before the phone. The second practice is training with the small. During the day, each time a minor annoyance produces the impulse to react, use that moment as a practice repetition. The pause, the breath, the question, does this deserve my peace? And then, the choice, not for all annoyances. For 3 per day, as a minimum. 3 practice repetitions that build the habit of choice instead of automatism. The third practice is the evening examination. Before sleeping, 10 minutes. Seneca's questions. Where did I maintain calm today? Where did I lose it? What automatic judgment produced the disturbance? What will I do differently tomorrow? Without self-punishment. With the attitude of the observer evaluating the day's training. And, at the end, the commitment for tomorrow. One specific thing you'll do differently based on what the examination revealed. 3 practices. 15 minutes of structured work, plus attention during the day. That's the program, not the program of whoever has all the time in the world. The program of Marcus Aurelius, governing an empire at war. Of Seneca, writing in the final years of a life that was shortening. Of Epictetus teaching while living with the physical consequences of slavery. All of them did it with the conditions they had. And those conditions, in none of the 3 cases, were more favorable than yours. That's not empty motivation. It's the most direct evidence possible that the program is within reach of any person willing to practice it with the consistency it requires. This is your assignment for this 10th lesson and for the beginning of your real training. This morning, or tomorrow morning if it's already late, do the 5 minutes of morning preparation. During the day, identify 3 moments where the minor annoyance produces the impulse and use each one as a practice repetition. Tonight, before sleeping, do the evening examination with the 3 questions. That's 1 day of training. Repeat it tomorrow and the day after, and all the days that follow, without exception. We've reached the end of episode 10 of Master Your Mind, the practice episode. The one that took the theoretical understanding of judgment from the previous episode and converted it into the concrete training program the Stoics used. Let's walk through today's 10 lessons. The first showed us that calm is not a gift. It's a skill that's trained just like a muscle, and that not having trained it until now says nothing definitive about who you can be if you start training it. The second showed us that the models you admire weren't born calm. They practiced calm every day until it became their way of being, and that the same process is available to you. The third showed us why the training has to be daily, because the mind returns to chaos by default without the work that interrupts it. And that Marcus Aurelius wrote his journal not because he had time to spare, but because without that work, the chaos would recover. The fourth showed us the correct attitude for the evening examination. Not self-punishment, but the observation of the athlete evaluating their training. And Seneca's 3 questions that produce useful information instead of guilt. The fifth showed us the material of the training. The small annoyances available every day as practice repetitions, and that whoever can't maintain calm before the insignificant will never maintain it before the serious. The sixth showed us the morning preparation with all its details. 5 minutes before the phone. What's under your control? The anticipated difficulties, the decision of how you want to respond. The seventh showed us why the training works at a deep level. The mind does what it practices, and if you change the practice, over time you change what the mind does automatically. The eighth showed us the most determinant factor of the results: consistency over intensity. A day without practice is a day where the mind returns to its patterns, and 30 days of consistency produce what no occasional effort can produce. The ninth showed us that Stoic training isn't meditating an hour on a cushion. It's consciously choosing in each small situation until the choice becomes automatic, and that this makes it infinitely more accessible than any practice requiring special conditions. And the 10th, which closes this episode's content, gave you the complete program. The 3 practices, the time they require, the way to do them, and the commitment to do them every day. That's what this episode leaves you. Not the promise that calm will arrive automatically. The training program that produces it when practiced with the consistency it requires. Before this episode closes, there's something I want to ask of you. This episode talked about training and practice, and the built calm that no gift can replace. And I wonder something. How? Many days have you been waiting to have more calm without having started training it? Not as an accusation, as the most honest question I can ask before this episode ends. If the answer is weeks, months, years, go to the comments right now and write when you start. Not if you're going to start. When? Tomorrow morning, tonight, with the examination. The next irritation of the day, as the first practice repetition. Write it. Because a commitment written in public changes the probability it will happen, and because there's someone in this community who's reading the practice. Comments, and who needs exactly that to start too. Your commitment can be their starting point. Go to the comments, write it. In the next episode, we're going to talk about something that may sound uncomfortable at first. That the difficult people in your life are not obstacles to your practice. They're the best gym you have available. The people who activate you most, the ones who have the greatest power to pull you from center, are exactly the ones who can contribute most to your training if you learn to see them that way. The next episode is called Difficult People as a Gym, and it comes built directly on the training program this episode. Established. Train calm every day in what you have. Tomorrow morning, before checking the phone. 5 minutes. That's all you need to start. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. There's something about the journey of the 10 lessons this close needs to develop, so the program is completely clear. The program has 3 practices, but there's a 4th that connects them, and that this episode mentioned briefly, but that deserves to be described in more detail. The sacred pause. It's the element that makes the other 3 work during the day. When the morning preparation has established the intention, the sacred pause is the mechanism that connects that intention with the real moment where the choice has to happen. When the minor annoyance arrives during the day, the sacred pause is what converts that moment into practice instead of automatic reactivity. And when the evening examination evaluates the day, the sacred pause is exactly what's being examined. How many times did it happen? When couldn't it happen? Because the impulse arrived first. The sacred pause is exactly the space between stimulus and response, the second episode of this series described. But now, in the 10th episode, it has content. Not just the space, the content of the space, a breath. The question, does this response bring me closer to or further from who I want to be? And then the choice, not the automatism. Those three elements, the breath, the question, and the choice, are the sacred pause in its complete version. Available in each moment where the impulse arrives before choice has been able to participate. It doesn't require special time, doesn't require ideal conditions. It requires exactly the instant the impulse produces before becoming reaction. That instant is always available, and with sufficient practice, it becomes progressively longer. The space that at the beginning lasted 1 second grows to 2 seconds, then to 3, then to a span long enough for the choice to be made with real clarity. That's the training of the sacred pause, available today. In the next irritation, use it. And the complete program, the 3 practices plus the sacred pause, becomes the training that Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus practiced with different forms, but with the same purpose. The calm that doesn't depend on circumstances to exist, the kind born from work, the kind built practice by practice, day by day, without exception. That's what this episode leaves you. Not the promise that calm will arrive if you wish for it enough, the program that produces it when practiced with the consistency it requires. Train calm every day in what you have. Tomorrow morning, before checking the phone. 5 minutes, that's the start. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. There's something about the 9th lesson that needs to be developed with concrete examples, because it's where the practice becomes most immediately applicable. The 9th lesson says that training calm is consciously choosing in each small situation. But what does that look like in the real practice of an ordinary day? Tomorrow morning you wake up. You do the 5 minutes of morning preparation. You leave the house. The first red light stops you when you were running just on time. That's the first training moment of the day, not the obstacle to training, the training itself. What do you do in that instant? The sequence is simple. 1. You notice the impulse, the irritation that arrives automatically when the light turns red with the time you don't have. 2. You breathe. A single deliberate breath before the impulse determines the response. 3. You ask yourself, does this deserve my peace? 4. You choose. Not because the red light isn't a real inconvenience. It is. But because the price of allowing that inconvenience to determine your emotional state for the next 20 minutes is significantly greater than the inconvenience itself. The red light lasts 2 minutes. The irritation, the automatic reaction produces, can last 20. Does this 2-minute inconvenience deserve 20 minutes of your peace? The answer, seen with that clarity, is almost always no. And from that no, the choice not to bite the hook of the red light is natural, not heroic. Natural. That's training with the small, in action, available in the next irritation, which could be in 10 minutes. Seneca described this type of moment in his letters with an honesty that makes the complete mechanism visible. He wrote that great philosophers were disturbed by ridiculously small things, by the neighbor's noise, by food arriving late, by the everyday inconveniences any life produces, not because they were weak, but because trained calm isn't a magical protection against everyday irritation. It's the capacity to handle that irritation differently from how automatic reactivity would handle it. And that capacity requires practice. The same practice the ninth lesson describes, consciously choosing in each small situation, again and again, until choosing becomes more automatic than reacting. That's the complete training, available in the next irritation of the day, which is already on its way to you. There's something about the 10th lesson that connects the complete program with the entire arc of the series in a way that makes visible what it really means to have arrived at the 10th episode. The 9 previous episodes worked from different angles on the same central problem, the automatic reactivity that determines behavior before choice is possible. The first episode identified it. The second gave the fundamental instrument for working on it. The third and fourth worked on its most intense manifestations, anger and fear. The fifth worked on the anxiety that devours the present. The sixth worked on silence as the first external demonstration of the internal work. The seventh gave Marcus Aurelius's complete training system. The eighth applied all that work to the most everyday test, provocation. The ninth went down to the root, judgment, as the source of all the suffering the previous episodes worked on. And this 10th episode delivers the program that converts all that understanding into sustained practice. The 3 practices: consistency, the identity of whoever trains, not as an episode independent of the 9 before it, as the one that integrates all the previous work into a life program that sustains itself beyond any specific episode. Because the work of this series' 12 episodes isn't designed to be listened to and forgotten. It's designed to produce a real change in the person who lives it, not the person who heard the episodes, the one who practiced them. And this episode's program, the 3 practices sustained with the consistency the 8th lesson describes, is the mechanism that converts 12 episodes of listening into the months and years of practice that produce character. The man who governs his mind, not in theory, in the everyday practice of his life, with his circumstances, with his irritations, with his small annoyances as the gym, with his morning preparation as the anchor, with his evening examination as the mirror, with the sacred pause as the instrument available in each moment where the impulse arrives. That's the program available to you tomorrow morning. Before checking the phone, 5 minutes. Train calm every day. In what you have, that's all. That's enough. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. Before the episode ends, there's something about the program this close needs to say with complete honesty. The program works, not because it's new, not because it contains some revelation nobody has discovered before, because it's exactly what Marcus Aurelius did, what Seneca did, what Epictetus taught, and all 3 documented it in sufficient detail for the evidence that it works to be verifiable, not the abstract evidence of philosophical authority. The concrete evidence of 3 human beings who practiced it under the most adverse conditions possible and who documented what it produced. The calm of Marcus Aurelius in governing the most demanding world that has existed, the equanimity of Seneca before exile and approaching death, the freedom of Epictetus in the most extreme conditions of external deprivation. Those are not abstract results, they're verifiable results of a specific program practiced with consistency, and that program is available to you under considerably less adverse conditions than any of the 3, with the same work, the same practices, the same consistency, and with time and practice, the same results, not identical. Each person is different and conditions are different, but real, verifiable, produced by the same mechanism, the mind that does what it practices, trained with the program, every day, without exception. That's all the program requires, and everything it requires is completely available to you. Tonight with the examination, tomorrow morning with the preparation, and during the day with the repetitions. The program starts today or tomorrow, but not in a week. Today, train calm. Every day, in what you have. Tomorrow morning, before checking the phone, 5 minutes. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. There's something about lessons 9 and 10 together that makes visible something about the program that neither says individually. The 9th says the training happens in real life, in the conscious choices of everyday situations. The 10th gives the program that structures those choices. Together, they produce something that's not just a podcast episode. It's a life plan, a plan for the next months of who you're going to be. Not the plan of whoever waits for circumstances to improve in order to be calm. The plan of whoever trains calm in the circumstances they have, regardless of what they are. Exactly as Marcus Aurelius did in his, which weren't better than yours. They were different. In many ways, considerably more demanding. And the program worked in them. It can work in yours, with the same work, the same consistency, the same honesty of the evening examination, the same anticipation of the morning preparation, and the same attention to the practice repetitions the day naturally produces. That's the plan. Simple in its description, deep in its accumulation, transformative in its consistency, available to you, not at some future moment when conditions are more favorable. Now, in the conditions you have, with the irritations already on their way to you, with tomorrow's morning preparation waiting for you, with tonight's evening examination that can start recording the work. That's the beginning of the plan, which can become months and years of practice that produce exactly what this episode and the 9 before it described. The man who governs his mind, available to you. One day at a time, starting today. Train calm, every day, in what you have. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. Now comes the part that separates those who listen from those who truly change. This community exists because you decide it exists, not with words, with actions. If something you heard today moved you inside, leave your reflection here. The one that gets the most support becomes the banner of this community, the collective voice of everyone who chose not to give up. A community that doesn't run from pain, that walks through it, with courage, with judgment, with honor. But listening isn't enough. You know it, you feel it. There's a difference between the one who consumes wisdom and the one who turns it into armor. That's why we created the Stoic Code. 2 principles forged over millennia by the most powerful minds in history. It's not just another book. It's a manual of psychological warfare against your own weaknesses. Each principle includes the deep teaching, its modern application, and an exercise you can implement today, not tomorrow, today. If you decide to get it, you're not just taking something for your growth. You become part of this mission. You help us bring Stoicism to thousands of people who are right now where you once were, who struggle, who fall, who need a word to remind them who they are. Your support keeps this podcast alive. It drives it, it expands it. Thanks to you, this doesn't stop. The link is in the description of this episode. Everything you need is right there. We'll see you in the next episode of Stoicism for Winners. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, without fail. Stoic sessions designed to be with you when life gets heavy, when staying calm is hard, when you need someone to remind you who you are before you forget it yourself. Follow us. The Stoic who doesn't train in calm won't find calm when the storm arrives. Until the next episode, we walk this path together, and every day there are more of us who choose not to give up. Remember this: you are the sole owner of your perception, the architect of your peace, the only one responsible for the war you choose to fight or the one you choose to end. That is Stoicism, not a philosophy, a way of being unbreakable. This is Stoicism for Winners.